If you've been thinking about starting a podcast but feel overwhelmed by the tech, the strategy, or where to even begin, this episode is going to simplify everything. I'm going to walk you through exactly how to start a podcast in 2026, step by step, in a way that's sustainable, aligned, and actually useful for your life or your business. I started the Wander Lover podcast in 2020, and it has been one of the most rewarding aspects of my business. I've also helped a handful of clients launch their successful podcasts as well over the years. The reason we all love it is because we can pack so much into 20, 30 minutes. And your message is so much more effective than short form content platforms like Instagram or TikTok. It's also really special to be able to speak to someone directly. It gives more of a friend to friend feel. Podcasting in 2026 is very different than when I started. You don't need a huge audience, you don't need expensive equipment, and you definitely don't need to overcomplicate this. What you do need is a simple setup and a repeatable process you can stick to. So let's start from the very beginning. The first step is deciding the real purpose of your podcast. Before you buy a microphone or think about a name, you need to be clear on why this podcast exists. Is it to support your business? Is it just a hobby? Is it to build authority in your industry, create long-form content you can repurpose, or simply share conversations and ideas that you care about? A podcast without a purpose quickly becomes inconsistent, and you're left just scrambling together episodes, and it becomes really confusing why you are recording. When you know the role your podcast plays in your life or your brand, then every decision becomes easier because you have that North Star. Once you know the purpose, the next step is choosing a clear podcast concept. This is where most people get stuck trying to be too broad. Your podcast should answer one simple question: who is this for, and what problem or desire does it support? You don't need a niche that feels boxed in, but you do need a central theme and content pillars. So for example, the Wander Lover podcast centers around online entrepreneurship and life design. Under those pillars, we talk about mindset, marketing, motherhood, and digital nomad lifestyle. Clarity helps listeners immediately know if the podcast is for them. And what you want to think about here is, what can you talk about for years and years on end? You don't want something just boxing you into one segment that you're going to run out of things to talk to. Think long term. What can you record 100 or 200 episodes on? Now let's talk about the name. In 2026, podcast discoverability still heavily favors clarity over creativity. So a name that clearly signals what the show is about will outperform something clever but vague. If you already have a brand, using your brand name or your name plus a clear descriptor works extremely well. Think long-term as well. Your podcast name should still make sense 2 or 3 years from now, even when you may be in a different chapter. This is why I really recommend having something tied to your brand or your name so that it can evolve with you. That is a great step in the right direction. After that, decide on your format. This is a very practical decision. Will your episodes be solo? Will they be interviews, or a mix of both? Will they be weekly or bi-weekly? Choose a posting schedule that feels good with everything else that you have going on right now. Will they be highly produced, or will they be more conversational? Choose a format that fits your current capacity, not your ideal future self. Consistency matters more than complexity, so a simple solo podcast recorded once a week will outperform an overly ambitious format that you can't maintain. So you want to make sure it doesn't feel overwhelming, it doesn't feel daunting. Done is better than perfect. And the last thing we want you to do is to plan out all of these things and get stage fright before you hit record. We want to make it as easy as possible for you to get started. Next is equipment. And this is where people tend to overthink. And honestly, you do not need to even think about it really at all. You can absolutely start with minimal gear, like just your laptop. You don't need a full studio or even a microphone or headphones. Of course, it's really good if you do have it, but you definitely don't need it to start. You don't need a mixer. You don't need fancy soundproofing. Record in a quiet space, close your windows, turn off your AC and fans, and focus on clear audio. You can always upgrade later once the podcast proves itself and you learn more about your workflow. And after that, choose your recording software. For solo episodes, you can record directly onto your computer using simple audio software. I personally use and recommend Riverside.fm because they record high quality audio locally and they make repurposing easier. So think about it as your all-in-one studio that you can access on a web app, and it makes your audio super smooth. But either way, just choose one tool and stick with it. Once your audio is recorded, you'll need basic editing if you prefer. Editing does not mean perfection. Your goal is to remove long pauses and obvious mistakes, if at all, but you definitely do not need to edit out every pause. In fact, overly polished podcasts often feel less human. So if editing feels overwhelming, you can either skip it completely or you can outsource this later, but it's helpful to understand the basics yourself first. Remember, again, done is better than perfect. Next, let's move to hosting. A podcast host is where your audio files live and how your podcast gets distributed to platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. In 2026, hosting platforms are very beginner-friendly. Choose one reliable host and set it up once and you are done. We use and recommend Libsyn, and I will include a link to them in the episode description, but your host will automatically distribute your podcast to all listening platforms. You do not upload episodes individually to every app. The host handles all of that. You basically upload, publish, and it distributes to every single streaming platform. Before launching, you'll also want cover art, so keep this simple and legible. Your podcast cover needs to be readable at a very small size on people's phones. One clear image, your podcast name, and strong contrast matter more than design trends. You can use Canva for this and start with one of their pre-made templates. You can include a photo of yourself and remove the background, or you can have it as just text. This is definitely not the place to over-design. And remember, it can always change in the future, so your first draft does not have to be perfect. It's constantly a work in motion. Now comes a very important step that many people skip: planning your first episodes. Before you launch, I want you to outline at least 5 to 10 episode ideas that you can work from. This removes pressure from having to think of new ideas week after week, and it prevents you from launching strong and then disappearing, which many people tend to do. Your first episodes should clearly communicate who the podcast is for, what listeners can expect, and why they should keep listening. And when you have that down, when you are ready to launch, I recommend launching with at least 3 episodes. This gives new listeners more content to binge and helps platforms understand your podcast faster. Your launch doesn't need to be perfect, and it does not need to be viral. It just needs to be real and consistent. Once your podcast is live, the focus shifts to sustainability. So decide how and when you'll record. Batching recording sessions works extremely well from experience. So for example, record 4 episodes in one session and schedule them out. This reduces the mental load and keeps you consistent even during busy weeks. This also helps if you have a calendar to work from and you know what is coming up, whether you have launches, whether you are traveling, whether you have family visiting. It helps you be consistent even if you have life going on. Promotion in 2026 is also less about pushing links and more about repurposing content so that it's bingeable on their respective platforms. Your podcast should be the long-form foundation that feeds the short-form clips on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube Shorts. It can be quotes, and you can extract ideas across multiple platforms. One episode can easily turn into various pieces of content without extra effort. So remember to work smarter, not harder. This is where podcasts become powerful for personal brands and businesses. Finally, I want to remind you that you want to give your podcast time. We've been recording weekly episodes for the Wander Lover podcast for the past 5 years now. Growth with podcasting is slower, but it is definitely deeper. Podcast listeners are loyal and engaged, and you want to focus on serving the listener, improving clarity, and staying consistent. Monetization, opportunities, and growth come as a byproduct of that trust. So if you've been waiting for a sign to start your podcast in 2026, this is your sign. Start simple and let the podcast grow with you across many chapters of your life. And if this episode helped you, please like, comment, and share it with someone who's been overthinking about starting their podcast so they can get started today. I will see you in the next episode, my loves. Have an amazing week.